Hey guys, welcome to your online recorded lecture for phonology sections 2.1 and 2.2. I really wish we could have done this in class together, but I appreciate your flexibility with me and watching this recording online. While we're doing this recording and while you're watching it, I'd like you to take the time to mimic some of the things that I'm going to show you, because today we're going to be dealing with phonology, which, as we discussed last week, means we're dealing with the sounds in the English language. So when we're practicing these sounds and I'm introducing these sounds to you, I want you to stop and make them repeat with me, I guess, these sounds. So that might mean that you don't want to listen to this lecture while you're in the middle of the library. Maybe you want to listen to it privately. You'll feel a little silly, I'm sure, making some of the sounds and stressing some of the sounds that we're going to make together. But part of learning phonology is experiencing it and practicing it with me. Also in this lecture, when I say, okay, I want you to pause and do these exercises, please do that. You don't have to do all the exercises that I offer you. I have quite a few for you today. If we were in class, we would have done them in groups, but that's not really what we're going to be doing today since this is a recording. But take the time to challenge yourself to learn the material by practicing it with the exercises that I ask you to do during this lecture. So we're going to start with Phonology 2.1. And the question is that I would propose to you in class is, why would we care about phonology? Why, as language teachers, do you care about the sounds in the English language, or any language for that matter? And how does that impact your teaching to have this awareness? Well, the reality is that in order to teach a language, you need to not only be able to teach maybe the words, the vocabulary of the language and what those words mean, but you need to teach your students how to say those words. So one of the things we know with phonological studies is that not every language has the same sounds in it, right? Spanish and English share a lot of the same sounds, but there are some sounds between the two languages that are very different. So an English speaker going to learn Spanish is going to struggle with some sounds in Spanish that they haven't learned or heard or used their whole life. So an example of that is that trilled R. I'm not going to mimic it very well, but for example, with the word perro, there's that trilled R, where as an English speaker, I'd want to say perro, right? You want to hit that R differently, because that trilled R that Spanish has isn't one that's in my language. Knowing that, and knowing that this is an issue for your students, right? They're acquiring a second language that has sounds in it that they haven't practiced before. You need to know what those sound differences are, and you need to know as an educator how to describe those sounds, how to describe making those sounds. If we were in class right now, I would say to you, okay, I want you to teach me how to make the sound for the letter M. So if you think about the way we pronounce that letter M in English, Monday, McDonald's, Miller, right? So that's the sound. So if we were in class together, I'd go, okay, that's the sound I'm giving you. Teach me how to turn that sound into So I go, and the first feedback you'd give me is, close your mouth, right? So I would do that. Then you would say, well, no, close your mouth tighter, right? Don't let any air out. So I'd go, and you'd all start laughing, right? Because there's something you're not explaining to me that needs to happen with that sound. So I would give you the hint, okay, tell me how to change my airflow. So I'm doing this, and as you're thinking about the sound, you're realizing, well, that air's going through my nose. It's not going through my mouth. Okay, so when we talk about the sounds in a language, we talk about you teaching those sounds, you need to know how those sounds are produced so you're better able to teach them. This is why we care about phonology, so that you as an educator can address these sound challenges your students are going to have. Just a quick note about IPA. We touched base on the International Phonetic Alphabet last week, and we're going to look more into that within this section here, this phonology chapter. When we're writing with IPA, so when we're using those phonetic symbols to write about sound, we want to use brackets, okay? We don't want to use quotation marks. Quotation marks are what we use when we're writing about the word. So I have the example here, the word fart, right? F-A-R-T. That's how we spell the word fart in the English alphabet. So if I want to write about the act of farting, I'm going to put it in quotation marks. However, if I'm going to talk about the sounds in the word fart, I'm going to put it in these brackets. And one specific reason we do that is because, as we pointed out last week, and we'll look at again this week, some of the symbols that are on that International Phonetic Alphabet look very similar to letters that we use in the English alphabet. So this is a rough transcription of the sounds for fart. F, t. Okay, so I want to know in this class when we're talking about words, the word fart, or when we're talking about the sounds in a word, the sounds in the word fart. And that's why we're going to use brackets. So as you stop this lecture later on to practice some of the exercises I give you, practice putting words in brackets. You'll notice that we don't put each individual phoneme in a bracket, right? It's not bracket, f, bracket, bracket, bracket. We just can put the whole phonetic transcription inside the bracket. When we talk about phonology, we basically need to divorce this idea of spelling. You need to forget all about how words are spelled and talk about what they sound like. I give you the example of the word machine. Look at the spelling of that word, M-A-C-H-I-N-E. If you were to pronounce that word the way it's spelled, you might say makine. Right? Because the spelling doesn't match what we're doing with the pronunciation. When we say the word machine, we would replace that CH in the spelling maybe with an SH. We might replace that I with an E. So we might, if we spelt the word the way it sounds, spell it M-A-S-H-E-E-N, right? Because the spelling doesn't necessarily explain the sounds in the word. So you need to forget all about that spelling system. We've talked in this class about prescriptivism and descriptivism. Prescriptivists are those rule makers, okay? So when we talk about oral language and us speaking using sounds versus written language, so spelling systems, which one do you think prescriptivists primarily controlled? And if you were to go back to that lecture, you would see that one of the points we made is prescriptivists more so control the spelling and the writing conventions of the language rather than the oral conventions, rather than the language conventions. The reality is prescriptivists has set these rules. Here is how you spell machine. And what's happened over time is that you and I, just because we can use the language quickly and whenever we want and no one's controlling it, we change the pronunciation. It's very likely that years and years ago that the word machine was probably pronounced more like McKine or McKean. Okay, so we've changed the pronunciation over the years. Unfortunately, the spelling system has not changed, and that's not something that's going to ever likely change. It's very likely that our spelling system, the way we spell words, will never really match the way we pronounce the words, which can make teaching a language like English very difficult. Even these words are difficult. So our spelling system in English is very complicated and it's slightly messy. And part of that is because we looked at the history of English and we know that the English language is basically a product of multiple languages and multiple historical events. So we have a lot of French, we have a lot of Latin, we have a lot of German words. Okay, and because of this though, we have a really congested spelling system, and I can illustrate that for you by looking at Bernard Shaw. He is a famous linguist and philosopher, and he made the comment at one point that in English, because the spelling system is so crazy, for lack of a better word, we can spell the word fish, F-I-S-H, as G-H-O-T-I. Now, at initially glancing at that word, you want to think, what, maybe goatee? Goatee? How does goatee spell fish, right? And I'm about to show you. So let's think about this first word. The first sound in the word fish, because again, we're talking about sounds too, is f, f, f. You get that F sound, right? Traditionally, we would associate that sound with the letter F, but look at this word, rough, rough. We're ending that word with the sound f, the same sound that we associate with the letter F. So based on this word alone, Shaw said, okay, well, GH makes the f sound. So I can start the word fish by spelling it with GH to represent the f. Okay, let's look at the next word. Women, women. Now, if you look at this word, W-O-M-E-N, We can also look at the singular, woman, woman. If you look at the spelling of these two words, the only difference between the spelling is the E and the A, right? But think about how we're actually pronouncing the O differently. We have women and woman. Wo. Okay? So when we're talking about the I sound in fish, I, we make that same sound with an O, using the letter O in women. Okay, following me on this? So now we got G-H-O. Let's see where he gets the T-I. If you look at the word nation, I'm guessing none of you pronounced that word nation. None of you gave it a T, right? You all gave it that sh sound. Well, sh can be spelt using the letters SH, but also in a word like nation, we can spell it with the letters TI. So you can see here where Shaw got his conclusion, right? It's super interesting. If we were in class together, I would say work in groups, and I want you to think about the word pie. Not the letter, not the spelling, not P-I-E, but I want you to think about the sound we give the vowel in that word. So ignore the spelling and think strictly about this sound. I. That's the vowel sound in the word pie. So think about I. Close your eyes and hear this sound. I. That's the vowel. Okay, I want you to think about the English language and go ahead and pause the video if you can, just to think about how many words in English can you think of that have the vowel sound I, and write those down. Come back to this lecture when you're ready. Okay, so if we were in class, I would have drawn all of your responses on the board, and what we would have found is that there are a lot of words in the English language that have this I sound, right? And we don't necessarily always spell that sound with I-E, as in pie, right? P-I-E. So we're spelling it as with a U-Y, guy, die with a Y-E, thyme or time, however you pronounce it, with just a Y, high with just an I, either. So instead of I-E for pie, we have E-I for either. And again, this is just to further illustrate for you that our spelling convention spelling conventions don't necessarily match with what we're orally producing, right? So when you're talking with young new language learners about how to spell in English, you can see where this would get really complicated. I can further illustrate this little conundrum with the word fish, again, by using just the f sound. So the sound that we're going to give the F in fish. If you think about it, we actually can spell that sound different ways, such as F as in fish, PH as in phone, GH as in enough, and then there's some words, very few, but there are some in English that have a PF beginning, and we give that sound an F, so Pfennig, basically, which is a German word where the word penny came from. So again, all this to say, as we're moving through this section, we want to focus on sound, strictly sound. You need to forget the alphabet, the English alphabet. That is somewhat helpful in terms of representing sound, but it really isn't. And we just illustrated that by looking at the vowel sound I and the consonant sound f. So when you're going through these exercises in the quiz, and I say something like, I want, think of the vowel sounds, or think of the word pot. What sounds do you hear in the word pot? And you're reading it on the screen because it's a written quiz in Canvas. Forget how we spell pot. P-O-T, forget that. I want you to think about how we pronounce the word. Okay, so forget spelling. We need to divorce the alphabet, the English alphabet, and strictly think about sound. Everything we do, you want to think about how it's said and what you're hearing, not how you would spell it. Let's come back to the International Phonetic Alphabet real quick. This is something that you were introduced to in Chapter 2, and we talked about it last week in class. This is an alphabet that represents the sounds of various languages. It was created in 1888 specifically by foreign language teachers to help to help make teaching language easier. These teachers would realize, okay, I've got a group of French students that I'm trying to teach German. There are some sounds that they're not getting in the German language. Why is that? Well, teachers decided, let's track all the sounds in French. Let's track all the sounds in German. Let's track all the sounds in English. Let's look at all the sound systems of these languages and figure out where these gaps are so we can better address sound when we're teaching this second language. The International Phonetic Alphabet that you have in your book is strictly just a chart on the English language. That is strictly the English language. If you looked through Canvas, you saw that I gave you a link to a master PDF chart from 2005 of the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it itself has hundreds of symbols because that chart also has the symbols in your book, but all the additional symbols represent sounds in other languages that are not in English. So I'm going to pull that up for you right here. This chart's available for you in Canvas. Last week, this under the section 2.1 materials, and you'll see that all these symbols here represent sounds that are in other languages. There are the English sounds also in here, but think about how many sounds don't exist in English. And these are the sounds in all the known languages. So I want to be clarified that we have some languages in the United States, sorry, in the world that we don't know about yet. So think about those secluded tribes on different islands that we can't access. We don't know their sound systems. These are just the sounds of all the known languages in the world. The International Phonetic Alphabet's awesome. It has sound symbols for a sound like this. We think of that as a kiss sound in English, but some other like tribal languages have this sound as part of their sound system. So think about saying the word fish instead of using that F sound, going ish, ish. Think about if that sound was in our language, ish, and then that would mean the word fish, right? There's also a sound in other languages that sounds somewhat like a raspberry to us, so that's a sound that some people have in other languages. So think about the word fish again. What if we pronounce the word ish, ish, okay? That's how these sounds are working. There's also some really unique nuances on this chart. I'm not expecting you to memorize the whole International Phonetic Alphabet chart. This is hundreds of symbols. We're not going there, but it is such a useful tool, and it can also help distinguish dialect differences. So here on the PowerPoint, you can see under that sound, ah, looks like an A between brackets. There's this little squiggly. I have a red circle around it. That sound represents this type of thing called a vocal fry. So you can picture, a California girl in your head. That is so cool. Hear that frying? We call that a vocal fry. Way cool. You're like just so awesome, right? Okay, I hope you can hear that. That squiggly represents that vocal we'll call it a vocal fry, right? Stress that you're putting on your throat when you're doing that to the words you're saying. It is super cool. This phonology is a super cool topic. That's also not something that's just strictly used by English teachers or language teachers. It's something that opera singers will use. And if you go to that link on this PowerPoint slide, you could actually find sheet music where it's written in IPA. So you have an English speaking opera singer who's singing a very fluent French opera song. And you think, wow, she knows how to speak French. She doesn't. What that opera singer knows is how to read IPA. And she or he knows, whatever phonetic symbol is coming up, they know what sound they're supposed to give it. And so they don't know the French language. I'm using French as an example, but they don't know that language. They just know how to read the phonetic alphabet. That big chart I just showed you from 2005, they know what all those sounds are. And this is something the Pope also uses. So the Pope speaks quite a few languages. He definitely fluently knows several languages, but he can read in more languages and seemingly speak in more languages than he actually knows because he knows the International Phonetic Alphabet. They will give the Pope a speech written in IPA so that it sounds like he's speaking that language, of whatever language he's trying to speak, without him actually knowing the language. He just knows what sounds are associated with what symbols. If we were in class, I would do, let's first have a memory check. We've already talked about how many sounds exist in English, and the answer there is 44. There are 44 sounds in the English language. We want to first talk about consonants. So if you have your chart from the book or the chart I provided you last week in class, you can go back to the PowerPoint slides or that folder in the Google Drive for the English IPA chart. There are the top part of the chart's consonants and the bottom part's vowels. Let's talk about the consonant part, which is the top two portions of both of those columns. Some of those symbols look very familiar, and on this PowerPoint here, I'm showing you which ones you probably know because they look like letters in the English alphabet. The question is, why do they have to look like English letters? We have to remember that the English alphabet is based on the Latin alphabet system. On Latin written symbols, right? Well, so is the International Phonetic Alphabet. This alphabet has nothing to do with English. This just happens to be based on the same Latin system we based ours on. But here are some phonetic symbols, phonemes, that you are going to recognize because they look like English letters, right? So we got B as in bed, P as in pick, D as in dog, T as in toy, F as in fish, V as in victory. You guys can keep reading. We can also, on the bottom right, we get to this upside down R. I know we don't have the upside down R in English, but we have a right side up one. And as you can imagine, when you see the upside down R, it's that R as in red. Okay. I want to stress right here that in English and Spanish, we have different sounds for the letter R, okay? When we are talking about sounds and using IPA and writing about English sounds using our brackets, we want to use the upside down R because the other R, the one that's right side up on the IPA chart, does not mean R. It represents that trilled R in Spanish. So perro, perro. Sorry for all my native Spanish speakers who are laughing at that. Go ahead and laugh. So it's the difference between perro, using the upside down R, and perro, using the trilled R. So we want to be careful because some of you will send me your name, and let's say your name is Robert. If you use the wrong R, the right side up one, I'm going to think your name is Robert, okay? So we have to be careful with the R's, and specifically because we are going to address a lot of Spanish while we're going through this as well. Here, though, are some consonants in our English sound system that are a little more difficult for you to identify with. Remember, I just went over a list of some that seemed very similar to the English language. These ones are symbols that you wouldn't innately associate with the sound. So let's look at that very first one on the top row on the left. Your instinct is to think that that symbol represents the sound J, like judge. You know, the letter J, and that's not the case. That symbol, though it looks like the English J, represents the sound Y, Y, as in yellow, okay? We move down further, and we've got sh, sh, as in ship, ch, ch, as in cheese, zh, zh, as in mirage, mirage, j, j, as in justice or judge. Remember, that's the sound you wanted to give the first one, but it's not that. It's that cool D3 thing. We have two different sounds that we give the letters TH. So listen carefully to this. We've got three, so th, th, th. And then there's the word there. Th, th, there. Th, th, three. Okay, there's a difference in those two sounds, which is what we're going to learn about in section 2.2. We've also got this ng, that ng sound. Keep in mind that that's not ing, ing, because the I represents a different sound. The ng is what gets the ng. And then we got this really unique sound that's like that glottal stop. We'll learn about glottal in the next section, 2.2. But say the word uh-oh, uh-oh, that throat stop. Okay, so I give you some other examples here on the right. We never say Batman, we say Batman. We never say butter, we say butter, butter, butter. We never say button, we say button, button, button. Okay, so it's this really unique sound that we don't see it all the time, but we usually are using it to replace the T sound. We're going to now transition into vowels. So we just talked about the top two part of both those columns. Those were English consonants. Let's move into vowels. We're going to briefly talk about vowels today because next week in class we're going to go more into the vowel system. But in Spanish we have 5 vowels, right? In English it's a little more complicated because we have 14 vowels. I'm not talking about how we spell them, I'm talking about the sounds we make. We have 5 vowel sounds we make in Spanish, and we have 14 vowel sounds we make in English. Here are the English vowels. This typically is one of the hardest parts about thinking about the sounds in English because they can sound very similar. I'm going to start from the left, and I'd like you to repeat with me at home. Bit, bit. Sheet, sheet, umbrella, umbrella. Father, father. Cat, cat. Wet, wet. Book, book. That one's super hard. If we had done that in class, you would have all said ooh, right? You see a double O, so you think the sound is ooh, but we don't say book, right? We say book. The next one, glue, ooh, glue. Bought, bought. Okay, let me pause before we go to the next column. For some of you, the sound we give in bought, so that very last item on the lower left, sounds similar as the sound we give in father. If you are one of the few in this class who cannot hear the difference, I'm with you. So one of the interesting things about phonology, and when we're studying full different languages or we're studying dialects, is that not every dialect has the same sound system. Namely, in this case, there are some English United States dialects that do not have a different sound between as in father and as in bought. To me, they sound very similar. I cannot make a different sound for them. Some of you might, okay? So keep in mind, if you're struggling to hear the difference between those two sounds, it's because for some of you there is no difference. You give it the same sound. Let's move to the right-hand side now with diphthongs. Diphthongs are basically what sound like 2 vowel sounds, but we consider them the same sound, and that is because they are in the same syllable. Syllable, meaning case. How many syllables in the word case? Case. There's 1 syllable, okay? How many syllables in the word shall be? Shall be. There are 2 syllables. Okay. When we have an instance in a single syllable where there's this 2 vowel sound, it's called a diphthong, and we consider it the same sound, okay? We're going to get into syllables, I think, next week when we go into sections 2.4 and beyond. But just hang with me. These are called diphthongs, so I want you to listen and repeat with me. Case, do you hear how it sounds like 2 vowel sounds? But it's considered a diphthong. It's 1 vowel sound, and that's a, case. Let's go to the next one. Sight, I, sight. Next one. Boy, oi, boy. Shout, ow, shout. The last one, mow, mow. I asked the first week of class, I had you guys transcribe with sounds the word like, and here I have a memory check. Do you recall the vowel sound we used in like? Well, that was up there with the example sight, I, sight, like. We use that a lot. This is the same exercise we just did with the word pie, right? I, pie, sight, like. That sound is everywhere. All these sounds are everywhere. If we were in class together, we would move into some group practice. So I'm going to have you do that. I'll go through these slides a little bit, but I want you to practice before you give yourself the answers. Just try it, okay? I have here, how do you say these words? If you look at, first on top, it says practice time. Practice, P-R-A-C-T-I-C-E. Okay, that's how we spell the word. But let's talk about why there's two different pronunciations. The first pronunciation at the bottom is practice, 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 practice. We have that upside down E, which is like umbrella, run, practice. Okay, this is the only phoneme that has a name, and that's called the schwa. Our upside down E is our schwa, with something we do all the time to kind of move quickly through speech. I'll show you in the next slide what we're doing with it. But we have this pronunciation called practice, and then we also have this very formal pronunciation, which is that next transcription over, where it says practice. Listen to the difference. Practice, practice. Us, is. Practice, practice. Both pronunciations are correct. One is just more formal. When I am in class, I'm likely going to say, it's time for us to practice together as a class. If I'm on the phone with my mom, hey, I'm ready to practice. Okay, and I'm going to switch to the other side. This is why we can use phonology to talk about dialects or talk about register shifting, right? Changing styles. We do that all the time with how we say things. On this next screen, though, I'd like you to pause the video and go ahead and look at the underlined letters and think about the sound we give those letters. So in the word wish, we spell wish with W-I-S-H. I want you to think about what phoneme, based on that English chart you have, goes with the W in wish. Okay, so work through this list, and when you're ready, proceed to the next screen for the answers. And here are your answers. Typically, if a student has struggled with this one, you've struggled with the E in tree, so number 4. Because vowels can be difficult, right? Students have struggled with the Y in yes, so that second one from the bottom is yes. But again, we forget that that J symbol doesn't represent J. It represents Y, yes. And the last one can be difficult too, nap. I've seen a lot of people choose the aw as in father, so nop, but it's nap, the same sound as in cat. If you were with groups right now, I'd have you do this exercise, so I would like you to still try it, and I'm going to show you in the next screen why working as a group to answer this question is a little more difficult. So in class, I would say use IPA to spell this word, and I would not pronounce that word for you. And there is a reason why I would not pronounce the word listen to you, and that's because what you would find is as a group, you would probably come up with 2 to 3 different pronunciations for the word. You absolutely would, and here's what they would be. There's 3 different ways we pronounce this word. Some of you might come up with a 4th or 5th one, but I'm telling you they would probably just be wrong, okay? So here's how speakers are typically saying this one word. What I want to point out first is that this word is spelled L-I-S-T-E-N. That's how we spell it with our English alphabet. None of you would have ever put a t, 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 as in Todd, sound in there because we actually don't make the T sound. You're all smart enough to know that. We don't give it a t sound. So none of you would have put the T, but what we would have really struggled with is how we produce that last vowel. And that really varies based on dialects, how you're going to pronounce this. So I bring this up to illustrate for you that when you're teaching students, you really are going to innately teach them your own dialect. If you look up this word in the dictionary, then the top pronunciation on this list is considered the average one. So that would be listen, 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 listen to me. Okay? The second pronunciation is that I, like bit, I, listen, 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 I, listen, listen. Okay? The last one is as in wet, listen, 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 listen. Very minor microscopic differences, right? But they do sound different. Let me go from the top to the bottom. Listen, listen, listen. Okay? Same word, but just microscopic differences. We do a lot of different things like this. So I'd have you read this to me in class using the chart. Go ahead and take a look at the top 2 words and tell me what words you hear. Well, you can't tell me what words you hear because you're on the other side. What I hope you're saying, though, is pause the video first if you'd like to take a look at it, and then resume this when you're ready. Okay, so if you were looking at the screen, then you were getting either, either. Those were the top 2. Either, either. Here's an example again in English where we have 2 correct pronunciations for the same word. Not one of those is more correct than the other. Either, either is still the same word. You're just choosing either or either for your case. At the bottom, you get to see that vowel sound. A. This is a diphthong, A. So that top one is A. The bottom one is You make this sound. Let me give you an example. May I have a book? May I have a book? Okay? Do you see how we're making those pronunciation differences? It's still the word a. When as a speaker, whether you say a or to me, I know you mean one thing. You're looking for a singular item, but your pronunciation's different. And again, the one you choose might be if you're in a formal context or an informal context. The last exercise we would do for this section is writing your name in IPA. I'd like you to do that, especially before you take quiz number 1, which is available for you now in Canvas. Because as part of quiz number 1, you're going to submit the spelling of your name in IPA. You might not get it right, and that's okay. We'll address it in class. You will get full credit just for trying to spell your name, first name only, in IPA. Go ahead and practice while you're at home before class next week, and next week we'll take a closer look at it. If after you're done practicing, go ahead and close out of this lecture, and let's move on to lecture 2.2. So I'll see you in the next section.